The day the sky turned orange over Cedar Hollow, Maren Vale was restocking gauze in a supply closet, counting rolls under her breath so she wouldn't have to think about anything bigger than 4x4s. She was 34 years old, the only nurse on the floor who never raised her voice, and everybody in that little hospital had decided long ago that she was nothing more than furniture in scrubs. Maren liked it that way. Invisible was a place she had worked very hard to live. The supply closet was her favorite room in the building, though she'd never have admitted it. It was small and windowless, and it smelled of cardboard and isopropyl alcohol, and the shelves were a perfect, orderly grid of things that did exactly what they were supposed to do. There was a peace in it the rest of her life never quite managed, the peace of small certainties, a roll of gauze. Wade, what a roll of gauze. Wade, it did not surprise you. It did not bleed out on you while you were still deciding what to do about it. She moved her lips as she counted. 22, 23, 24, and the numbers were a wall she built between herself and the noise in her own head. Mercy County General was the kind of hospital that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet, a 26-bed building at the edge of a town most maps didn't bother to label. The emergency department had 4 trauma bays, 2 of which doubled as storage when nobody was dying, and a single attending physician on shift who liked to remind everyone that he had trained in a real city. On a busy day, they saw a broken wrist, a kidney stone, a farmer who'd argued with a piece of machinery and lost. On a slow day, they saw nothing at all, and Maren restocked things that didn't need restocking just to keep her hands moving, because idle hands gave the past too much room. Cedar Hollow had been a pin she dropped on a map with her eyes half closed, a town far from any base, any city, anyone who might have known the woman she used to be. She'd rented 2 rooms over a hardware store, and never hung a single photograph, because there were no photographs she could bear to hang. When people asked about her past, and small towns always asked, she gave them a story so boring it discouraged. Follow-up army, a little, a long time ago, logistics. Nothing exciting. They lost interest before she finished the sentence, which was exactly the point. It had taken years to build that life, and most days she could almost believe it was real. The attending's name was Dr. Pruitt. He wore his stethoscope like a medal, draped just so across the back of his neck, even when he was only refilling his coffee, and he had a habit of speaking slowly to Maren, the way people speak slowly to children and dogs. He was not in his heart a bad man. He was a careful one, a man who had built his whole identity on the diploma framed in his office and the 4 years he'd spent in a teaching hospital in a city he never stopped mentioning. He was good at the medicine that came with time, the workup, the differential, the unhurried logic of a quiet shift. What he was not good at, though he didn't know it yet, was the medicine that comes with no time at all. "You're just a small-town nurse, Vale," he'd said that morning, not even unkindly, just bored, when she'd suggested the chest pain patient in Bay 2 looked worse than his numbers showed. "Let the people with the medical degrees worry about the big picture. You keep the linens stocked." She had nodded. She had stocked the linens. But she'd kept one eye on Bay 2 all morning, because the man's color was wrong, in a way no number on a monitor would ever tell you. A grayish cast under the fluorescent light, a sheen of sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. She had seen that exact gray on men in another life, men lying in the dirt with their bodies quietly betraying them, and her gut had learned to read it long before any textbook taught her the words. The patient in bay. 2 coded 90 minutes later, and Maren was the one who caught it. She'd been walking past with an armful of towels when she saw his hand twitch, in a way hands don't twitch, dropped everything, and had compressions going before the monitor finished its alarm. Pruitt came running and took the lead and got the man back, and afterward he remembered the whole thing as his own. Save the perceptive call, the steady hand. She mopped up the dropped towels and charted what needed charting, and said nothing, because saying a word was the one thing she could never afford to do. The whole architecture of her quiet life depended on her never being the most capable person in the room, or, on the days she was, on no one ever finding out. At 11 minutes past 3 that afternoon, the windows of the entire West Wing lit up white, and a sound rolled across the valley, like God dropping a mountain, and Maren Vale knew before the glass even stopped rattling in the frames. She was standing at the nurse's station with a chart in her hand when it hit. The fluorescent tubes overhead swayed. A potted plant walked itself off the counter and shattered. Somewhere down the hall, a child started crying. The light came first. That was the thing people always got wrong when they told the story afterward. They remembered the sound, the great rolling boom you felt in your sternum more than heard, but the light came first. A flash that turned every window in the West Wing into a sheet of white fire for half a heartbeat. Then the pressure wave, a soft, enormous shove against the whole building, and the windows flexed in their frames without breaking, and the swinging doors at the end of the corridor swung wide and slow. The chart fell out of her hand. She didn't notice it land. For 1/2 second, nobody in the building moved. That was the half-second Maren hated most. The frozen instant where ordinary people wait for someone to tell them this isn't really happening. She had lived inside that half-second 100 times in another life, and she had learned it was the most dangerous moment there was, more dangerous than the blast itself, because the blast was already over, and the dying was just beginning, and the dying didn't wait for people to finish being shocked. She had watched good soldiers lose casualties in that half-second, lose them to nothing but hesitation, and she had learned the only cure, for it was a voice. One voice, steady and certain, giving the frozen people somewhere to put their hands, so she found hers. That was the fertilizer plant, she said, quiet and flat and absolutely certain. The Halverson agricultural plant sat 2 miles east on the county road, a sprawl of steel tanks and conveyor belts and grain elevators where half the town worked the line, ammonium nitrate by the ton, anhydrous ammonia under pressure in fat silver tanks, diesel and dust and welding gas, 1,000 things that wanted, given the smallest excuse, to burn. Maren had read the plant's chemical inventory exactly once, idly, on a slow night when the local paper ran a story about a permit hearing, and the list had lodged in the back of her skull and never left, filed under the heading her brain reserved for things that can kill a great many people at once. She had never been able to turn that part of her mind off. She had only ever been able to hide that it was running. The phone at the station rang, shrill in the ringing quiet. The charge nurse, a kind woman named Dottie, who was 61, and wore her reading glasses on a beaded chain, and had never seen anything worse than a tractor rollover, picked it up and went the color of paper. Her free hand found the edge of the counter and held on. "There's been an explosion," Dottie whispered. The receiver pressed to her chest, as if saying it softly would make it smaller. "They're saying Dozens. The whole East unit's gone. There's fire, there's people trapped, there's people running out of there burned. And the county medics are an hour out, at least because they're staging for a hazmat. And the burn center's helicopters are weather-grounded, the ceiling's too low, and the next real hospital is 90 miles. Maren, us too. One's at a transfer in the next county, won't be back for. Then they'll bring them in trucks. Maren stepped around the counter. Something behind her eyes had already shifted, some old machinery turning over after years of cold silence. Gears she'd oiled and packed away and prayed she'd never need again, finding each other in the dark and beginning smoothly, terribly. Listen to me, Dottie. They are going to come in pickups and on flatbeds and in the backs of cars, and they are going to come all at once, and we have maybe 9 minutes before the first of them hits those doors. So I need you to stop being afraid right now. Not forever. Just for the next hour. You can fall completely apart in your kitchen at midnight, and I'll sit with you while you do it. Dottie stared at her. The voice coming out of soft-spoken Maren Vale was not a voice anyone at Mercy County General had ever heard. It was calm in a way that had nothing to do with peace. The calm of a surgeon's hand inside an open wound. The calm of deep water far beneath a storm. And it reached down into Dottie's rising panic and switched it off like a lamp. "What do you need me to do?" Dottie whispered. "Good," Maren said, and for an instant something almost gentle crossed her face. "That's the right question. Stay by the phone. I'm going to tell you exactly what to do in 30 seconds, and you're going to be magnificent at it." And she turned to face the rest of the building, and for the first time in 7 years, she let herself become, fully and without apology, the thing she actually was. Pruitt came striding out of the physician's lounge, demanding to know what the noise was, coffee still steaming in his hand, and he found his quiet, linen-stocking nurse, standing in the middle of the corridor giving orders, and the sight short-circuited something in him. "Vale, what in God's name is going on? What was that?" "Mass casualty," Maren said, not stopping, not even slowing. "Industrial explosion, the Halverson plant, 2 miles east. Dozens of blast and burn casualties inbound. No air evac, because the helicopters are grounded, ground transport an hour. Away at best. We are the only thing between those people and the morgue. For the next 60 minutes, Doctor, and we are not ready, so we're going to get ready, and we're going to do it in 8 minutes flat." She paused just long enough to look him in the eye. "I need you to listen to me, and to do it now. I know that's not how this usually works between us. Today it has to be. It's the difference between a lot of people living and a lot of people dying." She was already moving again, and the terrible thing, the thing Pruitt would turn over for the rest of his career, was that she moved like she had done this before, not panicked, not even hurried, exactly. Economical was the word he'd reach for later, and never feel was big enough. Every step had a purpose. Every order came in the same flat, certain register. No wasted breath, no wasted motion. She peeled off her cardigan and dropped it on a gurney without looking, and rolled her sleeves to the elbow, and for the first time anyone had ever seen, the soft-spoken woman from the back was the single loudest current in the room, and the whole building began. "We are not treating people inside this building," she said. "Not first. The instant we let patients flood the trauma bays, we lose the bays, we lose the corridors, we lose the whole hospital to a wall of screaming, bleeding people, and then nobody gets saved. Everyone gets sorted before they cross that threshold. Nobody comes through these doors until I, or somebody I've trained in the next 5 minutes, has put a colored tag on them. Are you with me?" Yes," Pruitt said, and the word was out before his pride could catch it, and afterward he'd understand this was the moment he handed the building over, the moment he grasped, far below conscious thought, that he was not the most qualified person in that hallway. She pointed through the glass doors at the broad concrete ambulance apron and the strip of brown winter lawn beyond it, sketching the geography of the next hour in the air with one steady hand. Green top on the grass far side, for the walking wounded. Anybody who can walk and talk and follow a command goes there and waits, and we deal with them last, because last is what they can afford. Yellow top here on the apron for the serious ones who can hold on a while, broken bones, deep wounds we've controlled, people whose bodies will keep them alive an hour, even if we never touch them again. Red goes straight through these doors into the bays. Those are the ones who die in the next few minutes if we don't put hands on them now. Airway, breathing, bleeding. The Reds are the whole game. She drew one breath, and for a flicker, something heavy crossed her face. And we'll need a fourth area. Black. Off to the side, around the corner where the others can't see it and lose their nerve, with a clean sheet, with dignity. For the ones we cannot save. You don't get to decide who we can't save, Pruitt snapped. And it wasn't cruelty, it was the last reflex of the man he'd been an hour ago, who believed medicine meant fighting for everyone. She turned and looked at him, and there was something in her face he had never seen, a stillness worse than anger and far older. "Yes," she said, "today somebody does. If we try to save everyone, we lose almost everyone, because we'll pour a whole hour into one body that was never going to make it while 6 people who could have walked out of here bleed to death in the parking lot. That isn't cruelty, Doctor. That's arithmetic. The cruelty is pretending the arithmetic isn't real, because pretending feels kinder, and it kills more people than any decision I will make today. I didn't write the math." Her voice dropped and went rough at the bottom. "I just know how to do it, and I'm asking you to trust that I know how to do it, even though you have no reason on earth to believe I would." He looked at her a long second. Then he nodded, slow and final. "Tell me where to stand," he said, and something in the architecture of the whole day settled into place. The first truck came up the county road doing 70 with its horns screaming, an old blue Ford with 3 men in the bed holding on to a 4th slumped across the open tailgate, and behind it came another and another, until the road into Mercy County General was a solid river of headlights and dust and grinding engine noise. They came in everything that had wheels. Pickups, a flatbed still loaded with last fall's hay, a wounded man laid out on the bales, a delivery van with its side door rolled open, and 4 people crammed inside, clutching one another. A school bus some quick-thinking foreman had commandeered, packed front to back with the walking wounded, sitting in shocked, silent rows, like children on a field trip to the worst place in the world. The automatic doors hissed open for the first stretcher, and the smell came in ahead of the patient, and Maren's whole body recognized it before her mind finished the thought. Scorched hair, that acrid singe. Cooked skin, sweet and awful at once, a smell the brain refuses to file next to food, no matter how it resembles it. The chemical reek of a fire that had eaten flesh and fertilizer and diesel in the same breath, ammonia stinging the back of the throat. It was a smell from 6,000 miles and 7 years away, and for one heartbeat she was not in Cedar Hollow at all. She was crouched in red dirt under a sky the color of a fresh bruise, rotors hammering overhead, a radio crackling her call sign, a long line of broken men in front of her, and not enough hands, and not enough minutes. The familiar, unbearable weight of it settling onto her shoulders, like a yoke she knew exactly how to carry. Then she was back, because she had to be. Because the only alternative, walking, wounded to the green top. Keep moving, keep moving. A voice carried over everything. The engines, the screaming, the slamming of truck doors, clear and without fear. And people obeyed without knowing why. The way frightened people always obey the one voice in the chaos. A man with his shirt burned, to the meat of his back and his eyes white with shock, caught her arm, hands shaking, begging, help me, please. You're walking, and you're talking, she said, low and steady as bedrock, which means you're going to live. You hear me? You are going to live. And right now I need you to prove it by walking to that green tarp and helping the people who can't. There's a man over there who needs water held to his mouth. Can you do that for me? Can you be the one who helps? And the man who had come through those doors, a victim with nothing in his head but his own roaring terror, blinked and steadied, and something in his spine came back online, and he nodded and walked away a helper. Because she had handed him a job instead of leaving him alone with his panic, and a job is the only thing in this world that has ever truly cured fear. This was the first thing. The thing nobody teaches you in nursing school, but every combat medic learns in the worst possible classroom, written in other people's blood. In a true mass casualty, the walking wounded are not your patients. They are 40 frightened people with 2 working hands each, and nothing to do but spiral, and if you put them to work, they become your stretcher bearers and water carriers and hand holders, and if you leave them alone, they become the second disaster, a panicking mob that overruns your doors and tramples your sick. You give them a purpose, or you give them a riot. Maren chose purpose over and over, casualty after casualty, one short sentence each, and behind her the green top filled, not with helpless people, but with helpers, a choice that would save more lives than any needle she put in all afternoon. She moved down the long line of incoming bodies with both hands, and her 2 eyes and nothing else. No chart, no monitor, no labs, no scanner, no second opinion, and she did. In 10 seconds per person, what she called it privately, in the locked room inside herself she never spoke from, was the worst job in the world. It went like this, and it went fast, on a track her body had worn smooth years ago. Always the first question. If yes, move to the next. If not, 1 move only. Tilt the head, lift the chin, open the airway, give the breath 1 chance to come on its own. If it came, the person was a red, highest priority. Get them through the doors. If it didn't, if she opened the airway clean and the chest stayed flat and still, she tagged them black and moved on. And that was the part that hollowed you out. The part that came to sit on the edge of your bed at 3 in the morning for the rest of your life, because moving on from someone who isn't breathing feels exactly like murder, even when it's the only way to save the 10 people behind them. She made that move, now twice in the first 10 minutes, and each time something small and irreplaceable went quietly out of her, and each time she did not let it show, because if it showed, the whole machine would falter. If they were breathing, how fast? More than 30 shallow breaths a minute meant the body was screaming for oxygen it wasn't getting. If the breathing was steady, she went to the wrist, pressed the nail bed white, let go, and watched, slow to flood back pink. More than a couple of seconds, circulation failing, red, color rushing back fast and strong. The last question, the brain question. Can you follow a command? Squeeze my hand. Look at me. If they could, they had working airway, working blood, working brain, and they could afford to wait, yellow or green. If they couldn't, if the lights were on but nobody was steering, red, breathing. 3 doors, and which one you walked through decided your tag, and the tag decided whether you were seen in 2 minutes or 90. Maren walked the line, deciding 10 seconds at a time. 100 small verdicts, each one a life held in her 2 red hands, and weighed and set down again. She wasn't stopping to fix anyone. That was the thing the other nurses couldn't understand at first, the thing that looked like coldness, even cruelty, until you stepped back far enough to see the whole board. A young woman knelt sobbing over a man with a shattered, gushing leg, screaming for somebody to do something, and Maren dropped to one knee, took one look, a wound ugly and dramatic and loud and entirely survivable. Done an artery she could shut down in 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds had a tourniquet from the supply wall, cinched high and tight on the thigh, twisted the windlass until the bright pumping stopped dead. 15:24. He'll keep, she said, already rising. 90 minutes, easy yellow, and you, to the sobbing woman, you're his job now, watch that bandage. If the blood starts again, find me and scream my name, but it won't. I promise you it won't. He's going to walk out of here. Now hold his hand and tell him so. And she was gone, leaving a woman who had stopped screaming, and a man who would walk on that leg for 50 more years, neither of whom would ever fully understand what they'd just watched. She moved through them like that, a tourniquet here, an airway maneuver there, a chest she listened to for one breath before she made the call. Each casualty was a face, and the faces would stay with her. That was the price the faces always stayed. But in the burning moment, each one was a problem to read in 10 seconds and slot into the right place. The teenage girl with the scalp laceration, bleeding like a horror movie, and meaning almost nothing. Green, hold this pad, press hard, go sit down. The old man with no marks at all, but a belly gone bored hard, and a pulse she could barely find, red, bleeding deep where she couldn't see it, straight to Boyd. The woman cradling a forearm with the white bone tenting the skin, gray-faced but sharp-eyed, and answering every question. Yellow, hold on for me. Life after life. Read and sorted and sent on. And then Halverson's Foreman, the one she'd remember longest from that apron, carried up the line on a tailgate by 4 of his own crew. Shrapnel from a ruptured pressure tank had stitched a ragged line across his chest, and he was breathing in fast, shallow sips, the breaths of a drowning man sucking through a pinched straw, the entire left side of his ribs not rising while the right side heaved to do the work of both. The veins in his neck stood out like ropes. His lips were going the wrong color. Maren had him flat on a backboard in 2 seconds, her fingers walking down between his ribs on the left, counting, second intercostal space, the line straight down from the middle of the collarbone, finding the spot by feel alone. Tension, pneumothorax, she said to no one and everyone, the words coming up out of the buried place without asking permission. The air leaking from his torn lung had nowhere to go, and was crushing his heart a little more with every breath, and in another minute it would squeeze that heart to a stop. 14-gauge needle, she said to the young nurse at her shoulder, a kid 3 years out of school named Pryor, who would tell this story for the rest of her career. The big one, angiocath box on the wall, second shelf. In my hand, Pryor pressed it into her palm, and Maren uncapped it with her teeth, and found the spot once more, and drove it in clean, over the top of the rib, firm. There was a hiss, like a tire going flat, a long wet exhale of trapped pressure, and the foreman's caved-in chest rose, and the ropes in his neck sank back under the skin, and his lips flushed pink as the blood dammed up behind his failing heart broke loose and moved. He gasped, a real breath, deep and whole and greedy, the first since the tank let go, and his eyes snapped into focus on Maren's face. Tag him red. Get him to Bay 1. Tell Boyd he needs a real chest tube. Maren was already up, already 3 feet down the line. Priya stayed frozen, staring at the needle standing up out of the foreman's chest, at the man breathing because of it, at the woman in scrubs walking away from a miracle as if she'd done nothing more remarkable than restock a shelf. "Where did you learn that?" Priya started. But Maren was already kneeling over the next one. Pruitt had started that afternoon certain he was the smartest, most qualified person in the building, and somewhere around the 20th casualty, he stopped being certain of anything except that he was witnessing something he did not have words for. He was a good doctor, in a small way, competent, careful, methodical, exactly the doctor you wanted for a slow puzzle and a long, quiet afternoon. But this was not his kind of medicine. This was triage, as a form of warfare, 100 decisions made in seconds, with no labs and no scans, and no time to be wrong. A whole hospital torn down to its studs and rebuilt into something else in 15 minutes by a woman he had called furniture that very morning and meant it. And the part that humbled him most was that she didn't take everything for herself. A lesser talent, suddenly the most capable person in the room, after years of being overlooked, would have tried to do it all alone. She read the whole building like a map and put every person exactly where their gift would do the most good. She put Pruitt himself in Bay 2 with the chest wounds, because that careful, methodical mind was perfect for the patients who needed steady management once the bleeding was stopped, and she told him so, plainly, no condescension in it. "This is yours. Hold this room for me." And the words landed on him like a warm hand on the neck, and he stood up straighter under them. She sent old Dr. Boyd, the surgeon 3 weeks from retirement, who'd spent the last decade on gallbladders and hernias, into the OR with a managed stream of reds, because she'd looked at him once and seen his owed hands remembered more than his caution let on. She gave the lab tech a clipboard and made him the casualty count, the single source of truth, because a mass casualty drowns in confusion, and the only life raft is one number. Everyone trusts. And she took Dottie, sweet, terrified 61-year-old Dottie, and made her queen of the green tarp, keeper of 40 walking, wounded now calming and bandaging one another in long, patient rows on the grass. It was, Pruitt would think for years afterward, the most extraordinary piece of leadership he had ever seen, and it had come out of the back hallway of his own emergency room, out of a woman whose name he had barely bothered to learn. At one point, he caught her by the arm between patients, his gloves slick to the wrist, his voice low and shaking in a way he was ashamed of. "Val, the man in Bay 3. The burns? It has to be 60–70% of his body, full thickness, over most of it, and he's still conscious, still lucid, still talking to me, asking whether he's going to be all right. There's no transport. The burn beds are 90 miles away. What do I tell him? What do I do? Maren stopped. For the only time that whole hour, she went completely. They were the opposite of cold. The saddest eyes he had ever looked into, the eyes of someone who had stood in this exact spot before, holding this exact unanswerable question. A burn that deep and wide, the lucidity is the cruelty of it, she said quietly, so only he could hear. He feels less pain than you'd think right now, because where a burn goes full thickness, it takes the nerve endings with it, and the body floods itself with everything it has in the first hour. So he's clear, and he's calm, and he's talking to you in a normal voice. And that's the worst kind of mercy there is. With the helicopters down and the burn unit that far, he has hours, and there's nothing in this building that changes that. I'm so sorry. I wish I were lying to you. Pruitt's careful face crumpled. Then what do I? You don't lie to him, Maren said. That's the first thing and the most important. Men know. They always know. And lying just makes them die alone. Behind a wall built out of your own fear, you give him something for the pain, even when he says he doesn't need it, because he will. You find out who he wants you to call, and you call them, and you hold the phone to his ear if you have to. You find out if there's anything he needs to say to anybody, and you make sure it gets said. And you do not, under any circumstances, leave that man alone. Her jaw tightened and her voice went rough at the edges for the first time all day. That's a job, too. The hardest one in this building, and it's not less important than the needles and the tourniquets. It's more. Almost anybody can be taught to put a chest needle in a man. Almost nobody can sit beside another human being while he dies and not get up and run. So if you can't do it, you tell me right now and I'll go do it myself. And there's no shame in it? None. Not. No, Pruitt said, and his voice broke clean in half. And this time he didn't try to hide it. No, I'll stay with him. I want to stay with him. And he went. He peeled off his slick gloves and washed his hands and walked into bay. And pulled a stool up close beside a dying man and took his unburned hand in both of his own, and he called the man's wife and held the phone to a face that could barely turn toward it. And he sat there, through the long, terrible middle of the afternoon, doing the one thing in all of medicine he was actually built for. Not the saving, but the staying. Because a nurse he'd dismissed as furniture. He would think about that dying man for the rest of his life. He would think about Maren Vale even longer. The National Guard convoy arrived 40 minutes in, 3 heavy trucks and a field ambulance and 20 soldiers, the deep rumble of diesel rolling up the county road over the chaos, and at the head of them stepped a man in a uniform with eagles on his collar that he plainly did not wear lightly. A full colonel. He'd been at the armory 2 counties over running a weekend drill when the call came, and he'd had his people on the road inside 15 minutes, because that was the kind of officer he was. A career man, 30 years in, most of them spent in places the evening news only mentioned when something had gone wrong. He had run mass casualty operations on 3 continents. He knew in the marrow of his bones exactly what a well-run casualty collection point looked like and how vanishingly rare it was, how many years and how much blood it took to forge one medic who could make one run clean. He came through the doors of Mercy County General, braced for chaos, for the usual horror of a tiny rural hospital, swamped past its limit. Doctors drowning, patients dying in the hallways, nobody in charge. And instead he stopped dead in the doorway, one boot still on the rubber mat, because what spread out in front of him was not chaos at all. He found color-coded tops laid across the apron and the lawn with a clean, ruthless logic. He could have drawn himself tourniquet times, written in black marker, straight on people's foreheads. A black top set apart and tucked around a corner, each still form under a clean white sheet. Dignity, guarded even here. The walking wounded organized into a working labor pool, the able tending the less able in long, quiet rows. A single source of truth, a man with a clipboard calling out a running count. A 26-bed civilian hospital, in the dead middle of nowhere, being run as a textbook-forward casualty collection point with more discipline than he'd seen in 2 actual wars, and the back of his weathered neck went cold. "Who is running this?" he said to the room, his command voice cutting clean through the noise by 30 years of habit. And a dozen bloody hands pointed, without one instant of hesitation, at a woman in soaked scrubs kneeling on the bare concrete over a small child. The colonel started toward her, and the closer he got, the slower his steps became, because something about the way she moved, the economy of it, the stillness held inside all that speed, the particular way she cupped a casualty's jaw to hold the airway open, was reaching back across 20 years and closing one cold hand around his throat. She finished with the child, got the breathing settled, tagged the small chest, handed the little one off to a soldier, with a low murmured instruction. Then she straightened up off her knees with a wince, the marker clenched in her teeth, and wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of a wrist that was red to the elbow. And she turned and she saw him standing there, in the middle of her collection point, and the marker dropped out of her open mouth and bounced off the concrete with a small plastic clatter. That, in the sudden hush, the colonel's face had gone white, as the sheets out on the black top. "I know you," he said, and his voice was not a colonel's voice anymore. It was the voice of a much younger man, in a far hotter place. "I buried you, we all. There was a memorial. There was your name on a wall." He took one slow step, then stopped short, as if any sudden movement might make her vanish back into the smoke. "Saint, your call sign was—" "Sergeant First Class M. Vale, 18 Delta, Special Forces medic, attached to my battalion outside Kandahar." The medic who held a casualty collection point together by herself for 6 straight hours when the relief column got pinned in a wadi and couldn't punch through. 40 wounded, 1 medic, and you held. We lost almost no one we should have lost, and it was all you. His eyes were wet now, wet and furious and amazed all at once, a man arguing with a ghost. "They told us you died on the medevac. I stood at that wall, Sergeant. Where, in God's name, have you been?" The whole ER had gone quiet around the two of them, that impossible total quiet that drops over a frantic room when everyone in it senses, without a word, that something enormous is happening right in front of them. The nurses stopped. Even the casualties seemed to hold still. And in the middle of all that, held stillness, stood Maren Vale, Sergeant First Class Maren Vale, 18 Delta Special Forces combat medic, call sign Saint, the medic who'd held the line outside Kandahar, facing down the truth she had spent 7 years burying alive as it finally clawed its way up out of the dark and into the flat fluorescent light of a SO. Small-town emergency room. "I didn't die," she said. Her voice was very steady, which was the only way anyone watching could have known the words were costing her every last thing she had. The medevac I was supposed to be on went down on the way out. There was a malfunction, there was the weather, there was... It doesn't matter now. It went down and it burned, and they never found enough of the crew to count them all, and in the confusion they counted me right along with them. And when I came to in a field hospital 2 countries over, with a whole different war's worth of shrapnel sewn up inside me, and a chaplain told me Sergeant Vale was officially dead and being mourned, she stopped. She looked down at her own 2 hands, red to the wrist with the day's work. I let them. God help me. I let them keep believing it. I let myself stay dead. A long, slow breath went out of the entire room. "Because I was done, Colonel," she said. And now she looked at him and only at him, soldier to soldier, the way you can only say the truest thing to the one person who already understands it in their own body. I had held too many collection points. I had made a black tag call too many times, pointed at too many men, and said that one, we let that one go. There's a thing you spend doing this work, a thing that doesn't grow back, and I'd spent all of mine. And then more I didn't have. I could not do it for one more day. The deciding. Her voice finally cracked, one thin hairline fracture running through the center of all that steel. I just wanted to count gauze rolls under my breath and go home to a quiet apartment and never have to decide who lives. I wanted to be small. I wanted to be nobody. In the kindest possible meaning of the word, and the world gave me one quiet little town where nothing ever happened. And then today it blew up too, so I suppose there's nowhere left to hide. I suppose, if I'm honest, there never really was. Doctor. Pruitt was standing in the doorway of Bay 3, his hand still warm from the dying man's grip, and he understood, finally. All of it at once. The morning. The chest pain patient, she'd flagged with one glance that he'd waved away, and nearly killed a man over the way. She never raised her voice and always let him take the credit for catches that had been hers alone. She had not been furniture. She had been a soldier living in the deepest cover there is, hiding the single most dangerous thing about herself, which was not a weapon. Not a temper, but simply how good she was. "Just a small-town nurse," he said very quietly, mostly to himself, and he had never been more ashamed of a sentence in his life. The colonel did not salute. She was not in uniform, and a salute felt too small for it anyway. He just nodded, once slow and deep, the nod one professional gives another across the worst day either of them has had in years. The nod that says without a word, "I see exactly what you are, and I will never again ask you to be less than that." "Tell me what you need, Sergeant," he said, and his voice had steadied into something that was somehow both a command and a surrender at once. "I've got 20 soldiers out there, 2 of them trained combat lifesavers, a field ambulance, and a working long-range radio. This is your collection point. It was always going to be your collection point from the second I walked through that door. I'm not here to take it from you. I'm here to help you run it." And for the first time in 7 years, Maren Vale let another living person know exactly who she was. And then she used it fully, without one flinch, without a single word of apology, the way she had not allowed herself to do since the day she chose to be a ghost. The last of the soft-spoken small-town nurse fell away from her like a coat dropped on the floor, and what stood up in its place, straight-backed and certain, was Saint. "I need litters, and I need hands," she said, and the old steel was all the way back in her voice now, ringing through it clean and carrying, a voice built and tempered for radio chatter under fire, Every red comes straight to me and Boyd. Yellows hold on the apron. Your two lifesavers start IV fluids and recheck every tourniquet every 15 minutes by the clock. And they write the time down every single time. No exceptions. Put your strongest soldiers on litter teams and run the worst cases to the OR. Your medics work the burns under my direct supervision. Nobody freelances. Everything comes through me. And Colonel, she pinned him with a single look, you get on that radio right now and find me a hospital with an open burn bed and a ground convoy that can roll tonight, because I have 9 people on that apron who will live if we get them moving inside the next 2 hours and die if we can't. And I am not adding 9 more names to that black top because nobody picked up a radio. So go make the call. Go. And the Colonel, 30 years in, eagles on his collar, a man who gave orders for a living, said, "Yes, Sergeant," and turned on his heel and went. They saved them. Not all of them. You never save all of them. And Maren knew that better than any living soul, knew the exact weight of the black tarp and the names beneath it, and the way each of those names would come to visit her at 3 in the morning for years to come. She would never be free of them. That was the tax levied on the gift, and she paid it again now 4 more times, and carried each new name without once letting her hands shake until the work was done. But they saved the ones the cold arithmetic said could be saved, and then a good handful more it had written off, and they did all of it inside a building that had no earthly business surviving the afternoon. For 1 more hour, the little hospital ran like a forward surgical team dropped into a war zone, a soft-spoken nurse suddenly and openly, a sergeant again, a humbled doctor who'd found his calling, and 40 walking wounded, transformed into stretcher-bearers and hand-holders, all of it held together against every law of probability by one woman. The Reds went through Boyd's operating room, and most came back out alive. The Yellows held on the apron, their tourniquet times rewritten every 15 minutes by soldiers who'd done it 100 times in worse places. The green top nearly tended itself under Dottie's surprisingly fierce supervision. Priya stopped fumbling somewhere in the first half hour and started flying, working at Maren's elbow and learning more in 1 afternoon than in 3 years of school. And the Colonel worked his radio like the weapon it was, and somewhere in the 2nd hour he came striding back with the first good news of the whole day. A regional hospital 90 miles out had cleared its beds. A full ground convoy was already rolling. When that convoy finally came, when the worst of the burned were loaded onto litters for the long drive to the city and the burn beds, and the second chances waiting there, when the green tarp had thinned to a final handful and the red bays had emptied, and the only patients left were stable and accounted for, ambulance doors into the long copper-orange light of the falling evening. And she sat down on the cold concrete curb, and she shook finally, the way she had not let herself shake all day. Her hands trembled hard in her lap, and this time she let them, because the work was done now and the trembling had earned the right to go somewhere. The Colonel came and lowered himself onto the curb beside her, an eagle on his collar and a tremor of his own in his big scarred hands, and for a long while neither of them said a word. People who have done this work together don't need to fill the silence. The silence is itself the conversation. The sky over the ruined plant glowed a sullen orange and red, the fire still burning itself out in the distance, and the first stars were coming out cold and clear above it, as if nothing had happened below the way. After a long time the Colonel finally spoke, his tired eyes on the fading red tail lights of the last convoy truck. "Come back," he said simply. Not active duty. There are ways. We need instructors more than almost anything. People who can teach our young medics what you just did out here on an ordinary Tuesday without breaking a sweat. You could save more lives from a classroom than you ever saved in the field, Sergeant. Just think about it. That's all I'm asking. Maren watched the last truck shrink toward the horizon, carrying away toward the city the people on those litters who would now get to grow old. All of them because of what had happened on this stretch of concrete. I did break a sweat, she said, and there was the faint ghost of something almost like humor in it, the first of the whole long day, and then much softer, all the humor drained out of it. No, my war is over, Colonel. It's been over for 7 years. I died in it, the way I told you. The woman you knew, over there. Saint, she really is gone now, mostly. What's left is just somebody who got very, very good at one terrible thing, and who would like, more than she can tell you, to never have to be that good at it again. She turned her head and looked back at the little hospital, its windows glowing warm gold against the deepening blue, its people still on their feet inside, still alive. I'm where I'm supposed to be. Somebody's got to keep the linen stocked in this town. She almost very nearly smile. Turns out I'm pretty good at the rest of it too, but the linens are the part I actually want. The colonel laughed, a wet, surprised, broken sort of sound, half grief and half something very nearly joy, and he understood. Of course he understood. He had spent 30 years watching what this work took out of the people who did it well, and he knew a soul that had paid its bill in full when he was sitting right next to one, and he knew, better than most men alive, that some debts get settled. He pushed himself up off the curb, his knees cracking in the quiet, and he looked down at the woman in the ruined blue scrubs, and this time he did salute. Not the soldier. The soldier was, as she'd said. He saluted the saint. His hand came up crisp and sharp and held there steady, and Maren looked up at him for a long moment, and then she gave him the very smallest of nods in return, which was all the answer either of them would ever need. Then he climbed up into his truck and drove off after his convoy into the orange and violet dark, and he never told one single living soul her secret. Not that night, and not on any night after it, because some debts a man pays only with his silence. Maren Vale sat on that curb a little longer, until the shaking in her hands had quieted back down to something she could hide again. Then she stood up. Her scrubs were ruined past saving, and her hands would not come fully clean for the better part of a week, and there were 4 new names she would be carrying now for the rest of her life. 4 new faces to add to the long, quiet roll she kept locked away in the room inside herself she never spoke from. But she squared her shoulders under the weight of them the way she always had, and she walked back in through those automatic glass doors into Mercer County General, into the bleach and the burnt coffee, and the low fluorescent hum of the only home she had ever once allowed herself to have. Dr. Pruitt was waiting for her just inside the doors. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning, and somehow, at the same time, strangely, like a far better version of himself, like a man who had finally found out the hard way what exactly he was for. He did not speak to her slowly, the way you speak to a child or a dog. He just looked at her, and his eyes were red and raw, and he said simply, "Thank you." And Maren looked steadily back at him, this careful, humbled man who had sat at the bedside of a dying stranger all afternoon, only because she had told him it was the most important job in the building. And she said, "Restock Bay 1. We're low on gauze." And Dr. Pruitt, who had trained in a real city, who wore his stethoscope draped across his neck like a hard-won medal, went, and he did it, gladly, without one word of complaint. The smartest man in the whole building at long last grown smart enough to take an order from the right person. She was just a small-town nurse. That was what she chose to be, with both eyes wide open, knowing exactly what she was choosing and exactly what she was giving up to choose it. The army wanted her back. The colonel had laid a classroom and a calling, and the deep-filling kind of purpose that gives a whole life its shape right down at her feet. And she had looked at all of it, every last piece of it, and she had chosen instead the gauze and the linens and the quiet, because she had earned the quiet, because she had bled for the quiet in deserts whose names she would never say out loud, because the simple right to be ordinary is a thing that some rare people have to buy in a currency most of us will be fortunate enough never to spend. The town would never know that the soft-spoken woman who counted gauze rolls under her breath in a windowless supply closet had once held the line between the living and the dead through 6 hours of a war nobody back home much liked to talk about. They would only know that on the very worst day Cedar Hollow had ever seen, the day the plant went up and the sky turned orange and the helicopters could not fly, and a whole town's worth of fathers and mothers and sons and daughters came bleeding to a 26-bed hospital all at the same time. Like nobody special at all, turned out to be exactly the person they needed, and that she had been right there among them the whole time, hiding in the back, stocking the shelves, waiting quietly for a day she had prayed would never come. And maybe that is the real truth of it, the one thing worth carrying home from a story like this. Maybe the most dangerous, the most capable, the most genuinely extraordinary people walking among us are not the loud ones up in the corner offices with their names painted on the doors, the ones who never raise their voices, the ones who let other people take the credit year after year and never say a word about it, the ones we look right past and underestimate every single ordinary day of our lives, right up until the one impossible moment when everything is burning and the helicopters cannot fly and there is no one left in all the world to call, and it turns out they are the only ones who will run toward the fire. You have very likely already met someone exactly like Maren Vale, somewhere in your own life. You simply don't know it yet, and that, in the end, is rather the entire point. If this story moved you, if Maren Vale earned even a small corner of your heart here today, then do me one favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel and tell me down in the comments, what was the exact moment you knew she was so much more than just a small-town nurse? Was it the needle going into the foreman's chest? The colonel, frozen in the doorway, saying her old call's sign out loud? I read every single comment. So stay with us, because there are a great many more heroes hiding inside the uniform, quiet people carrying impossible things, and we are only just getting started.